Have you noticed that Matt Goodwin's been quite quiet recently?
But I had noticed that Matt Goodman hadn't chimed in on this. I assumed that he
Okay,
was just
so
trying
so
to stay out of the hassle.
it's not just this. It's that Matt has been hosting a GB News show, been running his excellent Substack, but he's not been as front facing in reform. And I haven't spoken to Matt about this, by the way, but just noticed a trend here. Matt used to do a lot of polling. I mean, that's what he's known for. He's a political scientist. Why isn't Matt doing polling for reform? And it's because they've hired someone to do polling instead of Matt, even though Matt has been around for a long time. That person's a
He's
chap called
spoken at their
Chris
events. He's
Bruni
been
Lowe.
sorry, just a quick thing, for anyone who doesn't know. Matt Goodwin has spoken at their events. He has been very closely aligned with them and a long-standing now supporter of what reform are trying to achieve. So it's a very peculiar thing that they wouldn't be leaning heavily on Matt. Sorry, carry on, Connor.
Yes, so Matt's not doing their polling. The chap they've hired is a guy called Chris Bruni Lowe, who used to work with UKIP, who scuppered Nigel's, I think it was 2015 run in South Thanet by telling Nigel not to do any press, and then the Tories ended up bussing loads of people down to South Thanet and wiped him out because he couldn't get outside of the local bubble. He then joined the Brexit Party for a while, and now he's back with reform. And you must be questioning, why has this guy been hired to do their polling, to advise Farage not to talk about immigration when Matt Goodwin has a large public profile speaking about immigration? He's earned himself a GB News show, and he's a relatively reliable pollster and political scientist. But he's been put seemingly to the background, and Bruni Lowe has been promoted. It's just one of these more confusing hires that have been made by people in reform who are not on the, let's say, Rupert Lowe wing of things and are more on the Richard Tice, the Isabel Oakeshott wing of things. Also, Tice and Oakeshott, should be noted, have hired a bunch of underlings who will reply to any tweet they put out with unending praise. I'm thinking of Nicholas Lizak, whose surname is an anagram. There's a chap called Mike Simpson, who is a regional organizer for round here, and he replied very quickly to the post saying that Lowe had done something wrong, was saying, we need unity, we need time to move on. There's a chap called Stevens or something, who is like Rupert Lowe's comms director, who also piles in. So when Lowe dismissed my article in The Critic that was warning of this kind of civil war, he was dogpiling as well. So they've got a number of people on the payroll that will trumpet whatever one part of the faction in reform says and does in order to reinforce their power, even though it's not organically popular with the base or the broader electorate. And I think it's just a quite toxic trend because they're getting very clodded to criticism.
Well, you're absolutely right about being very toxic. And you could see this in Isabel Oakeshott's Talk TV appearance the day before the charges were laid against Rupert Lowe, where she was smirking and saying, poor, innocent, naive Rupert.
Catty and spiteful. That was an ugly look.
Yeah.
I at that point, it was that really made me... I'd never really had a particular opinion on Isabel Oakeshott until then, but I found her vulgar.
Yep.
After that, and it's part of the reason why I'm like, no, I want Rupert Lowe to win this fight, actually, just for that mean girl, spiteful, bitchy cabal that are currently...
She was so smug and satisfied with herself because she knew that some trumped up allegations were going to be presented the next day.
So what are your thoughts on this so far, Liz?
Well, I'm going to reveal I have been invited formally to speak at a reform branch event in my old hometown. And
can I ask which hometown that is?
That would be Crawley.
Yeah, we've been invited there too.
Oh, really? Awesome. But I'm yet to have a conversation properly about this because very, very disappointed with what's been happening, since Friday. It's been getting worse and worse and worse. And from the outside and from what we hear on the inside, it's all extremely petty. A lot of people have been going on big platforms such as like Talk TV, GB News, and saying that it's all to do with ego. And I think that does hold up a lot of merit because we look or backdate, and a lot of people have been doing this and realizing this, backdating all of the people that have surrounded themselves with Farage, that have been taken in by Farage and then propped up. And then if they just get a bit too big or a bit too big of a personality and start making some sort of positive noise, it might potentially outshine Farage and then quickly is contained and then thrown out.
Well, we talked about that on the podcast today, didn't we?
Yes.
And we started going through some names, and I think we got up to about 10 names. But the thing is, once you start going through names, you're likely to forget dozens more. And I have no idea how many right-wing careers Nigel Farage has destroyed at this point.
I mean, it is literally dozens. Like, for example, this morning I woke up to Henry Bolton, OBE, who was a previous leader of UKIP, tagging me in a tweet because I had tweeted out that clip of Stephen Wolfe saying, look, there's the same pattern over and over where Farage and his little cabal engage in reputation destruction and freezing a person out of the mechanisms of the party in order to completely sideline them and put their career on ice. And he says exactly the same thing. It's not just Nigel that does the dirty work. In fact, he gets his acolytes to do it in a kind of Machiavellian way in order to make sure that it doesn't directly reflect on him. So when for example, it was Channel 4, I think it was, put out a clip of him today saying, well, I just don't need this. I just don't, as if he had nothing to do with it. But there's no way Nigel had nothing to do with it.
You can imagine his shock as well, because he's used this tactic so many times, and to the point where it's basically just a habit. Okay, somebody's getting too popular, somebody's starting to outshine me, let's execute Order 66 yet again. And this time, to his shock, and I think he is shocked by this, because you've seen his appearances in the last couple of days, he is genuinely shocked by this.
It looks rattled.
He doesn't know why it hasn't worked this time.
So just a quick thing there. I've got a theory on that. So previously, this was done in sort of 2014, 2015, when there was less of an online presence for the kind of, I guess we'll call them the online right, less well-connected networks of activists. And this was, I spoke, when I was in UKIP, I spoke to lots of people, obviously, and lots of them told me and warned me about Farage, but I didn't really want to hear it. I thought, well, surely
Same.
this isn't really true. But no, everything they told me obviously was true. And the problem was that the people involved didn't have a large enough public presence and didn't have a strong enough network of supporters. And so they would kind of just have to lay down and accept it and go, well, I guess, I just get sidelined then.
And Ben Habib was probably the first time that this had happened to somebody who did have a following and a social media presence. Yeah. And it was like, the first bullet that chinked the armour, and then the second one, which is Lowe, that went through. Yeah,
and the Ben Habib one, obviously completely unnecessary. And, Farage calling him bitter and twisted. Anyone who personally knows Ben, as we do, we know that he's not bitter and twisted. But the problem with Rupert Lowe is that Rupert Lowe is basically the kind of perfect foil to everything that they were saying, right? Yep. So Rupert Lowe, long history in public life, so everyone knows he's a known quantity and they know all about him. He is very, very well liked by the people around him. There's dozens now of character witnesses saying, no, Rupert's an absolute teddy bear, he's a complete gentleman in all circumstances, he's never bullied anyone, and we will all come out and stake our reputations against Nigel Farage in favour of it. And the thing is as well, if Rupert Lowe didn't have such a good history of, I covered on the podcast yesterday, the BBC went to Great Yarmouth and started interviewing people on the street, and they got nothing but glowing praise from the people on the street. Oh, you're the best MP we've ever had. I had a problem with this thing, and he sorted it out the next day. It's like, That's awesome. I can't get my MP to do anything.
They tried to do a character assassination on basically Boomer Jesus.
Yes.
And it simply didn't land. Yes. Nobody wants to talk about these allegations because it's so obvious to everybody. It is simply because he was getting popular.
He gives his salary away to charity every month. Like, you've chosen, it's literally Boomer Jesus. He chose the wrong guy. And the thing is, right, it would have been fine for Nigel if Rupert was prepared, like all of the others, to lay down and take it and just accept, Nigel Farage is steamrolling me now. I guess I've just got to accept it. But Rupert has dug in his heels and he's just saying no. And just for the past 2-3 days, he's just like, nope, you're lying about me, Nigel. You're lying about me. I'm contacting my lawyers because I am actually independently wealthy and I don't need to take this from you. Mm-hmm. And so Nigel seems to have actually come into contact with the immovable object of reputation destruction at this point, because Rupert Lowe seems to actually have done nothing wrong. And actually seems to be a genuinely good man.
And they have the gumption to turn around and say, well, it's just a distraction, and just to completely ignore what's been happening. And even as well, to touch on, I remember obviously Connor putting out his article, just giving fair criticism of reform. And it's not just Farage. It seems to be within the party at the very top, with Richard Tice having a go at Connor for simply giving fair criticism and, saying, and you as well.
Blocking me for saying don't bend the knee to
don't bend. Hate. Yeah, unbelievable. So clearly it's not just Farage. It's clearly the people that he is surrounded with as well, right at the top.
Total lackeys.
Yeah.
That's the name. They're lackeys. Like,
ex-Tories.
but it's not just that, though. There's a kind of servile, supine nature to them that I find really offensive. Like, and I really, really think it's a reflection of the character of Farage himself that he chooses to surround himself with people like this. I mean, anyone in this office is completely free to criticize or contradict me on anything, for any time, for any reason, and people do, and that's totally fine.
So
I would hate it if people didn't, because I'd be like, right, what don't I know? I'd feel like something was happening that I should know about.
Conspiracy.
Yeah, exactly, right. But this is a weird way to deal with things. But Harry, I'd like to bring you in at this point. What do you make of Rupert Lowe's response in particular?
Oh, which one? He's made a number of responses at this point.
The general tone.
The one that's on the screen.
Pick anyone that you find interesting.
Well, I mean, I find it interesting that he's not avoided the subject. He's not decided to stay silent, and he's just gone straight for the throat, even though he knows that that's going to make him some enemies within the party, but the party's already declared themselves his enemies, so I suppose that doesn't really matter to him. He's been quite principled in all of this and very eloquent in all of his posts that he's put up about it. So big respect to him here. What I wanted to say actually was in relation to the previous conversation we were just having about Nigel Farage and his tendency to, well, betray everyone he's ever worked with, which is that, let's not forget that, Carl, you have been a victim of that in the past.
I have. I try not to take things personally, though.
Yeah. Let's not forget that, back in 2018, he quit UKIP because of the anti-Muslim fixation that the party had, and then went on to smear them as being too far right for him. And a funny thing with that is it always seems to play exactly into the mainstream media and the uniparty's hands, because off the back of that, you get if this 2019 article that I've pulled up from The Independent that's titled "Nigel Farage's success is good news for one reason. He's killed off those who are even loonier than him." And of the two that the article names, there's one Stephen Yaxley Lennon, otherwise known as Tommy Robinson, and another Carl Benjamin Sargon of Akkad. And this goes with all the other patterns of behavior that he's displayed, along with in response to one of your, I think it was in response to the daily video that you posted yesterday asking if Nigel Farage is actually right-wing or not. Pete North put up this he only ever puts up very, very long posts on his Twitter account, but it was interesting because he said that he was a former member of UKIP back in the earlier days. And he said that Nigel Farage, and obviously you can only take his word for this, but I trust it enough, which was that at some meeting that Farage was at, somebody brought up an anti-immigration stance that Farage was very, very, very nervous about. He didn't really want to address it. And it was only after all of a sudden you get a party like the BNP making gains off of very strong anti-immigration rhetoric that Nigel Farage decides to adopt it for himself, to siphon off their votes. And then later on in his career, he's bragging about how he destroyed the BNP. And not to say that I'm any particularly big fan of the BNP. I mean, Nick Griffin is an absolute clown, after all. But this seems to be a repeated pattern, which is that when the going is good, Nigel Farage is a Thatcherite. When he needs to get people's votes, all of a sudden he comes out with the strong anti-immigration rhetoric. And this is something we even saw just a few weeks ago in that interview where he was arguing, saying that I'm not anti-immigration, I'm not a populist, I go for small minority affairs. Yeah, the Bloomberg interview. And it does, and then the Winston Marshall interview when he was saying that we're going to have to find a way to cooperate with the mass of Muslims that are going to have us outnumbered by 2050, and then the fact that he appointed a Muslim as chairman in the first place. Frankly, I think the pattern of behavior that this shows is that Nigel Farage is ultimately a charlatan with no fixed principles, who's more than willing to throw people under the bus. And this always plays into the uniparty and the mainstream media, because they can put him as the outmost rightward edge of discourse, and anybody that he then throws under the bus, well, that's too far. It's a signal to the public to say that you can worship Nigel, he can be your populist hero who's going to betray you every time. Anybody that's too untrustworthy for him, don't take them seriously. Of course, now, as you say, we've got more online momentum. So there's a better resistance to it. But he's been allowed to get away with this for, decades at this point.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotusheaters.com.